Okay, we're starting first shir in Mishnah since we came back after Tishrei. Continue from where we stopped, and we'll get until Sif Tezayin. Shiurim are in honor of I have a friend. His son Menachem Mendel ben Adel Miriam is in the army, and he together with all the rest of the soldiers should fulfill their mission and should come back home safely. Until Seif Yud, the past few Seifim, we discussed basically when you're not allowed to open up a window. One of the things that was mentioned was this concept is a chazaka for a window. Well, again, window doesn't mean window in the term that we understand. Window, we went through a discussion in the Pesach Tshuva about windows made from glass, if it counts as the same. There's somebody who tried to compare glass to what the Gemara refers to as glass. One time the Gemara glass was dark, so it's not really the same, but the concept of a window is a opening through which one person could see what's going on outside towards somebody else's property. So up until Seif Tes, we pretty much discussed the concept of chazakis when it comes to windows, and Seif Yud, it discusses the size of the window. The reason why there's a discussion on the size of the window is the size of the window, the purpose of the window, and there's a differentiation. This is from the Gemara. There's a Chalon Tzuri and a Chalon Mitzri. Chalon Tzuri is a big window through which a person could stick his head through the window and look at what's going on outside, and that one. And then there's a Chalon Mitzri, which is a small one through which you cannot really stick your head out and see what is going on. If you want to compare it to glass, it could be one that's you could see through, one that you can't see through. There's a difference between whether it's above the height of Daled Ames, which is the standard, at least in those days, pretty much the heights of a person. Whoever was here doing mikvahs, a shir mikvahs is amal berum shalosh ames, because that's the height of a person without his head. Daled Ames is pretty much above the height of people. So if you have a window above Daled Ames, it's different than a window below Daled Ames. But that differentiation is only regarding a small window, because by a small window, if you can't stick your head out of it, you can't look around up and down. So therefore, if it's below Daled Ames, the window, a small window, you could sit in your house and you could look. If it's above Daled Ames, even if you're going to be able to look through the window, you're not going to be able to see what's going on outside. So the first part of the seif is if there's a window, whether it's above, if it's a big window, whether it's above Daled Ames or below Daled Ames, or a small window which is below Daled Ames, then once a person gets a chazaka on that window, that means the person who opened the window acquires a chazaka for that window. He cannot, the other person, who is the one that's being viewed, can no longer block that window, build in front of that window, unless he makes a distance of Daled Ames from the sides of it. That means there is some sort of chazaka which kicks in over here. The chazaka is the chazaka of the person who has the window. Now, why is there such a chazaka? Very simple. In the Chalon Tzuri, which we mentioned before, there's a concept of Hezekriya. The fact is, because he could stick his head in and look out the window. If the other person who is being viewed did not make a mecha, it's obvious that he was meichel on the re'iyah, and therefore he gets a chazaka. The person who made the window gets a chazaka. Not only does he get a chazaka for having the window. Now, there's no such a concept as chazaka for hezek re'iyah. The chazaka is for the opening. There's no chazaka that you're allowed to look at what somebody else is doing. We discussed it, and the Alter Rebbe is even more machmer in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Even if a person doesn't tell you anything, maybe he's embarrassed to tell you that you should stop looking at what he's doing. There's still an issur. The chazaka is that the person doesn't care that you have the opportunity and the possibility of looking out the window at what he is doing. Now the chazaka that you have is not only for the actual rights that you have to have the window, but also for the purpose for which you opened the window. Usually the reason why people open these openings in the walls is to get air. If the purpose was for light, that is discussed later in Shulchan Aruch, and we're soon going to get into the discussion what is the definition of light, if it b'chlal applies today or not. It's lav dafka b'chlal applies today, but maybe it applies in a different form.
What do you mean air? The air can go through.
Yeah, but those, again, I told you, windows in those days were openings in the walls. So there's air coming in. Or a person wanted to have a beautiful view. And he opened the window. Like I said, the person had a house, and his house, the back of his house is facing Mizrach. And one of his Hanois in Olam Hazeh is in the morning, once the New York Times gets delivered to his door, he'll sit down in the kitchen. If he has a big window, then he could sit as the sun rises. He sits with his coffee, reads the New York Times, and he could go to shul. It's a hachana. Some people want to learn Daf Yomi before, whatever the taiva is. We're not getting into that discussion. But it's not for the purpose of light. For the purpose of light is a different din. So this, he has a chazaka, and the chazaka is for the purpose also of what he did. So therefore, this concept of having a chazaka to be able to look at beautiful trees is mentioned in the Rashba. The Rashba says, what's an example of a person who's machzik? Stakal beginners. He likes looking at trees. So now, if the other person is going to build in front of it after he was already machzik, he's blocking him from the use that he had until then. Now, but that is only in a Chalon Tzuri, which is big. What in a Chalon Mitzri? Chalon Mitzri, there's no Hazakriya. So, if it's within Dalad Ames, below the Dalad Ames line, then the person on the other side should have been Moicha. Should have told him, I'm going to want to build here in the future. You're not Moiche. The fact that you're not Moiche on this right of building shows that you have waived, you knew that he's going to have this window open for the purpose of air, because no other purpose other maybe a little bit of light, but the light is different, and therefore he was machzik. But if the Chalon Mitzri is above the height of Dalad Ames, where there's no Hezekriya, and he could still build in front of it. Now, what is this chazaka that he really has over here? That means we mentioned that he has a chazaka in the window. Is that really a chazaka that he owns some kinds of rights? That means that he could prevent the other person from building, or there is really no chazaka at all? We're talking about this Chalon Mitzri above Dalad Ames, a small chazaka. As I say, there's no. He didn't bother to be moiche. The nafkamina is, could the other person block it or force the other person to block it? If the person has no chazaka, then he could actually go ahead and close his window. And if the person doesn't have a chazaka for the right of preventing him from building, then he could build up to his property line. It doesn't have to be marchik dalad ames, but he can't go and put bricks in the other person's window. This is machlokes Rishonim, Ramban and Rosh. What's the definition of this chazaka? And if you want to understand the machlokes properly, it's in Ktsois over here, Sifkatan Gimel. The way he explains the Ramban is that, and the Ramban is not so clear to understand, but the Ktsois explains it pretty clearly, that the person that the neighbor who the window is being opened to has no right to force the window owner to block the window. But he could build in front of it, above it, below it, block the airflow into the window, etc., with the understanding that just because you were not moiche on your hezekriya doesn't mean you could go ahead right now and put a window right there, so you should be able to look into his house. That you cannot do. The fact that the Baal HaChalon was not machzik,
The two things he can't do is he can't build a window into your window, and he can't block it now.
He can't put bricks into my wall. He could build up to his property line, whatever his ownership is. He doesn't have to be marchik dalad ames. He can do whatever he wants. But he can't go into my wall and put bricks. If you say that the Ramban says that he was not machzik doesn't mean that there's nothing here. It means that the person who has a Chalon Mitzri above the Alamas has something, some rights, enough rights that you have no right to force him to close it, and you have no rights to actually go into my property and close it. As opposed to the Rosh holds that there's absolutely no chazaka by Chalon Mitzri above the Alamas, and therefore the person who has the property next to it could actually go ahead and brick up your window, and also he could put up a window and look into your property, and if you are not going to be moiche, then he is muchzik also. And that's the two shittas. And the Xoshen explains weiter that according to the Ramban, that you cannot block the window. According to the Rosh, you could build whatever you want. You can even block the window. According to Ramban, you could block the window. You could build up to the window, but you can't go into his property and brick up the window. So he says he could build from any direction that he wants. He could build around the window. He could build in front of the window. Why? Because over here you have a reverse koyfen al midas dain. Let's remember the machlekes of the Ktsas and the Sivas, that according to the Ktsas, the original machlekes we spoke about in the beginning, that the concept of hezek riyah, is it that I have a right to use your property, or I don't have a right to use your property? That means, is it that the original understanding is I have a right to use your property unless I cause you damage, or I don't have a right to use your property? Elamai, the Bezdin has a power of koyfen al midas dain, that if I do certain use in my property, which has an effect on you, but it doesn't do you any damage, so therefore the Chachamim made a carve out for koyfen al midas dain. So the Ktsas goes l'shita, say that there is be'etzim, you should not be allowed to do anything to somebody else, into somebody else's property. You're not supposed to have a noise from somebody else's property unless koyfen al midas dain. So over here there's no koyfen al midas dain. Why? Because if you're going to tell the guy you can't build right in front of his window, you're going to tell the shachan you can't build right in front of his window, what you're doing is zeh chaser. There's no zeh of zeh chaser, there's only zeh of zeh chaser. Because up until now, if you're going to say that you could block the window, then it's zeh v'zeh chaser, but I'm doing it in my property. If you're going to say that the first person had the rights to the window and I'm blocking him, so the person of the window is going to be nana and the person of the chaser is going to be chaser. So therefore, in such a scenario where there is no concept of midas daim, we go back to shali v'shalcha shalcha. That's not midas daim. Now there's no machlekes is not here. It's before in Kuf Gimel. The Alter Rebbe goes like in the Sivas. Well, the Sivas goes like the Alter Rebbe.
There's always a hezek. There's
no inherent. Whether there's an inherent right. Is hezek riyah means that I have an inherent right to use your property without your permission. Now, it looks like the Alter Rebbe follows actually the Ktsas, not in the Sivas. That there is no, but the person is allowed to tell somebody else, you can't have hanoah from my property. Only the Chachamim made a carve out for zanane v'zeh loy chaser, that you should allow it koyfen al midas dain. That's in the Sivas. And the Sivas says that there is a concept that even though that when I own something, you have no right to use it, even though it causes absolutely no damage to me whatsoever. Elamai the Chachamim, there's koyfen al midas dain. The Mechaber continues that if a person opened up this Chalon Mitzri la'oira for the purpose of light, and not for the purpose of wind, or for the purpose of being able to look out the window, then even if it's a Chalon Mitzri, which is above the height of Daled Amis, then an Achas Kam V'Kama, if it's a bigger window, then the person on the other, then the Shachan cannot build in such a way that he's going to block all sunshine from coming in, and he has to put the distance of Daled Amis. Why? because the mechila of the Baal HaChotzer was not on the opening of the window. The mechila of the Baal HaChotzer was he understood that you need light. And since he understood that you need light, he allowed you to receive light through your window. And he said, I'm not going to make an issue out of it. Therefore, regardless of what form of light fixture you created in your property, you have a right to continue with receiving it. And he has to leave him the access to the light. And the Rama basically says that will depend if it's depend on the dayan, depend on the kind of the window, and pretty much that it would be a dayan has to see if this window is made for the purpose of light or this window is made for the purpose of air, because by a Chalon mitzri, if it's made for the purpose of light, yes, obviously once a fight happens between the neighbors, one is going to claim, I did it for the purpose of light. And how are you going to be able to prove fakert? Therefore, the Rama says, I call it for whatever the dayan sees and whatever the kind of window sees. The Rashba, which is brought in the Beis Yosef, says that every window which brings sunlight into the house, even if there is another entry point for sunlight into the house, is still considered a window for the purpose of light. And the minig of the Batei Dinim already is, in those time of the Rashba, to be machmir in every kind of window that any sunshine goes through it, whether it was originally for the purpose of sunlight or it was not originally for the purpose of sunlight, that we are machmir and we say that it was for the purpose of sunlight, because we see that sunlight comes in through it. There's a chance to is Beis Shloimeh Mishnah סימן Daled, which also mentions that being that the Rama left it in the hands of the Dayanim to determine which window, pretty much he gave an open blank check to the Dayanim, and almost every window will fall into that category. So the question begins now, when you have today electricity in every house. Is there such a concept bichlal as Chalon la'oira? The nafkamina would be if you're allowed to, if a person has for ventilation is one thing. But if it's not for the purpose of ventilation, and it's not for the purpose, if it's for the purpose of looking at trees, but if he says for the purpose of sunlight, yeah, could you say such a thing in today's day and age? Because the Rashbam in the Gemara says the reason why Chalon la'oira is different is because every person needs light. Today, every person has light, unless you're in a situation where there's no electricity. Like in certain places of the world today, there is light that comes in that comes in from electricity. Do you need sunlight or not? So essentially, all the windows today are just to make the house look nicer and to make the house more comfortable. But it's not for the purpose of light, which is a necessity. Looking at a tree is not a necessity; it's an enjoyment. Having light is a necessity. So therefore,
also not necessary for air either.
It's not necessary for air either because you have ventilation. You have other systems of ventilation today. So therefore, it would be. There is a svara to say that there's no concept of oira, Chalon la'oira today. However, when you look at the Rashba clearly says that even if there's sunlight coming from another window, you still have most chalonis are la'oira. So that would leave an option that even today, that the addition of sunlight into the house does make a difference. Now, or you could look at it from a third point of view, because you could say either according to Rashbam that he says that light is a necessity, so therefore today it's not a necessity, or you could look at it from the Rashba that even if you have light coming in from other sources, it is still not a problem. Every window you have to look if it brings in more light into the house. Or a third way of looking at it is depends on mechila. Yeah, because if you're going to go based on mechila, then the question would be, if you have mechila for this specific thing, the neighbor understood that the reason why he was meichel is because this person wants more light in his house, and he doesn't like sitting with fluorescent bulbs, and he prefers sunlight when the sunlight is there, and that's why he was meichel to him. So even though it would not fall into the category of tzrichim la'oira, it would fall into the category of the mechila was for this purpose. If the mechila was for this purpose, then the person cannot retract the mechila, and he could block him from doing it. And the last point is what you also discussed in the past, that Ba'atzim today, you go according to the Machusik, you go according to the Chukim U'Minhagim. So now, there is a separate usage that's connected to sun, which is not,
What is the din of the Machusa?
regarding has the Kriya? Go walk down the street, you'll see everybody has windows open.
No, blocking the light.
Blocking the light? Depends where, depends what the rights are for each place. Some places, some buildings, the way they were set up originally, your property line ends, your house is built to the end of the property line, and the other person also has it, and he has a right to build up to you, and if you decide to open the window, it's your problem, he could block it afterwards. In some places there is some form of right, not specifically for light. Now, since we're mentioning sunlight, just a pointer that there is another usage for sunlight, which is solar panels. That's not connected to Hezekri, it's not connected to this. If you're going to look in Seif Chafei, which we're going to get to later on, not today, then over there where it discusses about, that over there mentions about somebody who opened for air to flow into his wine cellar, that means that it's something which is completely not related to Hezekri. So then, if I put up solar panels, the Chayra would be the same category, but we will get to that Bevoi Hayoim when we discuss it. Now, Pesach Tshuva in Sifkot and Yud Aleph brings from the Shus Yaakov a discussion which is, we'll call it, it's a side discussion to the Siman, because it starts with a question and then goes into a whole other discussion which is important to know, which is connected to cutting down trees. Sifkot and Yud Aleph. One person planted trees that are now blocking his friend's window. And the Baal HaChalon says, you're blocking my view, cut down your trees. And the person who plants the tree says, Sakana, can't cut down trees. So the Shus Yaakov says, B'pshitis, that l'chayr it's not a problem. Why? Because the only time you're not allowed to cut down trees is b'derech hashchasa. But if the tree is mazik, to the person himself, if the person planted who owns the tree, if it's mazik to somebody else, it's not b'derech hashchasa, and therefore it's considered mutter. However, he says, but I have a different question, that when the Gemara talks about blocking sunlight, it's talking about putting up a wall which blocks sunlight. I never saw in the Gemara that putting up a tree that blocks some of the sunlight is also in this isur of mafil. And the Shvus Yaakov brings a raya from the Chavas Yoel, Siman Kuf Tzadik Hey, that a person is allowed to cut some of the branches which block his own window, and therefore the Shvus Yaakov concludes that in this scenario, the person has an obligation to cut branches that are blocking his friend's window. The Pesach Tshuva himself disagrees with this raya, says that the Chalkas Yaakov did not understand the Chavas Yair, but it's not negatis. On this Pesach Tshuva, there is a Beis Yaakov, which is in the blue book, Eitzer Mefarshei Shulchan Aruch, and he adds to this, since we started with a blocking sunlight and we moved to cutting trees, so he continues this discussion about cutting trees. Now, being that he felt that it's connected to Choshen Mishpat, so Beis Yaakov felt the same way, and therefore we should discuss it. It's always an opportunity to discuss a topic which will come up in your life, even though it's not connected directly to Dinei Niskei Shchenim, it's connected to other things. And he brings upon him Yofis and Parsha Sheftim, and also Shas Tshuva's Binyan Tzion, that you are allowed to destroy a tree for the purpose of a mitzvah. L'mashal, a person has a tree and he needs wood to make a sukkah, and there's no accessibility to go by wood. So what is he going to do? He needs beams to hold up his chach, so he's going to go, or he needs beams to hold up the walls. He's going to go and chop down the tree and make beams out of it. That's mutter because it's a tzerich mitzvah. And from that he says, maybe over here it's also a tzerich mitzvah. He goes into a whole discussion of cutting some branches is b'chlal considered an isur, and he says that if you're going to go based on the logic that's based on ashchasa, then ashchasa doesn't apply only to a full tree. Ashchasa will apply also to branches. If the isur is midin ashchasa, leisa bal tashchis, and that's supposed to do hashchasa. So b'derech hashchasa makes no difference if it's a branch or not. And if it's a tzerich mitzvah, Makes no difference if it's a branch or not either. You're allowed to. So hashchasa would be that. And then the B'derech Hagav, he also mentions that he brings some shas to us of the yavetz, that even if the tree, if it's a fruit tree which stopped giving fruit, is also isser to cut it. And he brings from the Piskei Tosfos in Psachim that someone who cuts down a tree which does not give fruit, ein reisim and bracha. And he concludes with a tshuva from the Bochacher that about trees in a forest which put out berries. That's a shaila regarding mitzvahs at Luis Ba'aretz. If that is also the same din would apply to these trees if you could cut them or not. But that's just a side discussion to this. Being the Pesach Tshuva brought it, I just mentioned you were to look if you want to go a little bit more into this topic as it's connected to Choshen Mishpat instead of dealing with it in a different chelik in Shulchan Aruch. So you look in the Beis Yaakov on this seif, on seif Yud in this Siman. Seif Yud Aleph discusses the shape of the window, and if there is a frame, it's not a frame. I'm not going to get into it now. Seif Yud Beis discusses what is the din when somebody had a window, and then somebody went already and blocked it, or already built in front of it. And now the person who has the window is not moiche. So now the person who has the wall is a muchzak. Now he gets the chazaka. Until now the Baal HaChalon is the chazaka. Now comes the owner of the wall and says, I have a chazaka. I don't why? Because I blocked your window and you didn't say anything. And the Baal HaChalon no longer could be moiche. Now obviously what we're talking about is a permanent structure, because a temporary structure that's built in front of a window, there's no mechila. If I know that my neighbor is doing construction and therefore he put up these big tall construction gates and it's blocking my view, I know my mechila is only until the construction is over. And where could you prove this from? From the tshuva of the Mabit. Tshuva of the Mabit discusses about a sukkah which blocks somebody's window. The Mabit in Chelik Gimel Simon Kuf Chafei says that if somebody builds a window in front of, builds a sukkah in front of his friend's window, technically the friend could go and say, I don't want the window blocking, I don't want my window being blocked by your sukkah. But if Yom Tov started and you were not meicher till Yom Tov started, the Baal HaSukkah was machzik until the end of Yom Tov, and no longer than that. Shaila is if the minhag hamokim is to leave your sukkah up till Chanukah, if that's a din or not. That's totally minhag hamokim. Minhag for construction depends. If a person loses his pants while he's doing construction, then yeah, they state in the Pele Yoyetz and the Mareches Binyan that a person who goes, why does the Gemara say that the Hoesek Binyan is maskin? Because a person walks in, thinks that he's going to spend a certain amount of money. He knows, the Metzias is that anybody who goes into construction has to realize it's going to be double the price than what it says, than what it's original. And if he's not planning for spending double, he's going to lose his pants in this deal. Therefore, therefore you see all these structures which are half built, and you have gates that can sit for years. Shaila is if my mechila was until this person has finished his construction, however long it's going to take, or that I predicted that you see a lot of places, you see projected completion 2019, and you still see the same sign is still there. You walk in the street, you'll see them, 2020, whatever it is. So you can't have a teretz of COVID, because COVID was after 2019, but still the sign is still there. And it is what it is. Now, in the Moyed Kol Chai to Reb Chaim Falaji says that if the Baal HaChalon was moiche and the Baal HaSukkah did not take it down, so your sukkah is begeder with sukkah gzula, not geitza. He takes it a little bit more extreme. Now the Ramos says over here, points out right away, that the mechila is a mechila immediately. And the Smeh Sifkat Mechav Zayin points out, this is according to both shittas, that you don't need 3 years in this one. Why? Because hikir beniskoi miyad. Full nezek is understood the moment I block your window. It's not a thing of have to wait 3 years and not have to wait 3 years. And the Rama says Yeshem, you still need a taina. That means, according to the opinions, the Rishonim which hold that you need gimel shanim with a taina. So over here you eliminate the gimel shanim as we said, but the taina is still still remains. And when do you need a taina? Only obviously if the Baal HaChaloin has if the Baal HaChaloin has a raya or a shtar that he purchased the rights to open the Chaloin, and therefore he has a shtar raya on the kinyan that he purchased the rights to have a Chaloin over there. Therefore, if the person wants to take away the other person across wants to block it, he's going to say, hey, I already paid you for this right, therefore you have no right to block me. But if the Baal HaChaloin only comes with Chazakah, then the person who blocks the Chaloin also only uses a Chazakah, and the Chazakah happens immediately, just like the Baal HaChaloin gets a Chazakah immediately according to the opinion. Why is that? That when it is only a koyach chazakah, then blocking a chaloin only needs a chazakah without a taina, because that proves that your original chazakah for the chaloin never kicked in b'chlal. If I really had a chazakah for a chaloin, I would have a document to prove it. The fact that I had so to speak, a chazakah and a chaloin, and you went and you built a wall in front of my chaloin, and I did not say anything right away, is it that from originally when I built the chaloin, I had some form of agreement with you that as long as you're not building, my window is going to be there. Once you start building, then my window is going. I have no problem. My window gets blocked. Now, if the Baal HaChaloin himself blocks his window, that's not a raya that he loses his chazakah. Simple reason: some people do block windows when they have to do certain forms of construction, especially if they don't want people to know what's going on inside the house, and the only way it is if he takes apart the whole window frame. And today's example would be if somebody puts bricks on his window rather than wood. If a person just put wood on his window, it doesn't mean he lost his chazakah. It means he's doing construction. If a person puts bricks up his window, then you know that this is more of a permanent structure, and that he is losing his rights to his chazakah. Now, Sifim Yudalot, Tezvav, Tezayin discuss the concepts of a chaloin which is opened, which currently does not cause hezek to your friend, and down the line will cause hezek to your friend. I'm just going to discuss Yudalot and Tezvav. Tezayin is a full sugi of its own, which in Baba Basra is called Sugi of Chadol and Dvairim, if you remember it from Yeshiva, and if there'll be a chance we will discuss it, but I'm not going to discuss it right now. I'm just going to focus on Yudalid and Tesvav and some nafkaminas l'maisa which come out from it. So now, the discussion is in Yudalid and Tesvav is about somebody that wants to open a window, but his friend across the street, or he wants to take out a porch in front of his house, and his friend next door to him didn't do it yet, and didn't open windows across the street in the Rishus Harabim. And therefore, if I'm going to open windows along my whole front of my house, when the other guy's going to want to open windows, I'm going to be mazikim with riyah. So the question is, do you do half, or do you do straight? There's a machlekes rishonim. Rabbi Yoina, Rashba, Rabbi Yoina's shita is, and by the way, it's mashma from the Beis Yosef on the tour in Bedek Havayis, the achra is like Rabbi Yoina, not like the people who disagree on Rabbi Yoina. The shita of Rabbi Yoina is that if I have a house on this side of the street and you have a house on the other side of the street, neither of us have windows facing each other, and I want to open up windows, I could open up until the half point. And after the half point, that I can no longer open, I'll choose. I'm going first, so I could choose which half I want to take. But I have to leave half across that the other person should be able to open windows down the line to be able to get his windows there without me looking at him. Now the Prisha on the tour says that according to Rabbeinu Yoina, this is not a din that's toloi in mechar. That means this is a din, even if the person across the street was not moiche and is not saying any comments, the bezdin has the obligation to tell a person, you could only open up half. That is the halacha. You have no right to go further than the half point. Now, there is the Sme, who is the same person as the Prisha, by the way, in case you didn't know, over here writes something different, a little bit different than what he writes in the Prisha. So Sifkat Lamed Beis over here, he says that when you half is not specifically half, but you might have to do a little bit more than half if need be. Means you have to be more distant, further away from the half point if need be, if the windows are going to be in a certain angle, which are going to cause Hezekriya to the other one. And the half point is just, according to Rabbeinu Yonah, is just the max point to which is your border, is not your starting point. The border up to where you can do is the half point. But if it's going to be Hezekriya, then you have to move even before the half point. But in the Prisha, he explains it differently, and he says that this din, that you have to move further, even more away from the middle point, towards the side that you chose, is only when it's open to Chatzar HaShutfim. But if it's open to Reshus Harabim, then no, you go until the half point. And in this point, in this detail, that Rabbeinu Yonah will be moided to the Rosh, which you're going to see soon, the other Shittah, the Shittah Zachalkim, that if it's up to the half point, you could do up to the half point, and if it causes damage if technically it causes damage to the other person, then down the line when the other person is going to open his windows, he's going to have to be marchik from you, rather than you having to think now how far I should be marchik from the other person, and the half point is the half point. That is the Shittah of Rabbeinu Yonah. The Rosh and the Rashba disagree on Rabbeinu Yonah, and they hold that you cannot block him at all. Why? Because the first person who opened the window was Zoiche min ha-hefker. Reshus Harabim is hefker. What is this whole Zoiche min ha-hefker concept that we're discussing over here? The Sim Mishpat does an interesting explanation on this, and he says this is the Yesod of the Machlokes in Rabbeinu Yonah and the Rosh and the Rashba. According to Rabbeinu Yonah, what is the definition of Reshus Harabim? Reshus Harabim means a property that belongs to the king, and the king was meshabed it to every resident on the property as shutfim. And therefore, they all become as shutfim, as chatzar shutfim. And therefore, each person could only do up to half. According to the Rosh and the Rashba, the Geder of Reshus Harabim is that the king does not give it to anybody. The king defines it as hefker. And if the king defines it as hefker, whoever goes first. Now, according to the Rosh and the Rashba, what is exactly this definition of zoiche min ha-hefker? Does it mean that he acquires the heir of Reshus Harabim, or he doesn't? What exactly does he acquire? We could throw a line that the person was zoiche min ha-hefker. So zoiche min ha-hefker means something he acquired from hefker. But what did he acquire, and how did he acquire it? According to the Nesivis, and the Nesivis says heir is not something that can be acquired. Heir is davar she'ein boi, there's no davar she'ein boi mamash, and a kinyan can only be chal on something which has metzias. So heir is davar she'ein boi mamash. Is placed in Shulchan Aruch where you do see that a person acquires heir rights, is only because he acquired karka with it, and the heir came together with the karka. But over here, it's clear that the person is not zoiche in Reshus Harabim. So therefore, he's only not zoiche in the avir of Reshus Harabim. So therefore, what is he zoiche in? And the Sibis over here explains that being that he's the first one who opened beheter, he had a right to open beheter. So he is zoiche in one little thing. He's zoiche that the other person can't later do damage to him. Means he doesn't acquire anything. Zoiche min ha-hefker, his only acquirement is that I acquired the right to prevent you from doing damage to me. Up until now, if you would go first, you would be able to do damage to me. and I would not be able to do damage to you. Being that I went first, you have no right anymore to open windows and do damage to me, but it's not an actual kinyan of ownership in the air of Rishus Ha'ab. Therefore, the Nesivis Firzais over here, and this is in I think, and this is in the first Nesivis over here. If the person who had, the first person who opened windows, his house burned down to the ground, and the second person now went and opened windows, the second person across the street, he becomes the Pesach Rishon Beheter. And the first one who had a house and it burned down can no longer put up windows. When he rebuilds his house, he lost his rights. Now, right after this Nesivis, there is a square brackets, which is copied from Ksav Yad, and Nesivis changes his whole opinion. But before, not everybody who wrote about Nesivis saw this Nesivis from Ksav Yad, and people asked powerful questions on the Nesivis. Before I'm going to get to what Nesivis, the way he, so to speak, retracts his statement, so I mention one of the people who discussed the Shoshanas Yaakov, which is also in that blue Yalf Mefarshei. It's a very Yisodis Dike book on Mispat, which was not reprinted until recently. He says that this concept, that if a house burns down, the first person's house burns down, the second one becomes the Rishon, is only b'diavad. That means if the first one opened windows, then the second one went and opened windows, because we're talking about according to the Rosh and the Rashba that is borderline called Alan Gvar, whoever goes first. And then the first house burned down. Then the second one could say, I'm not letting you put up windows. But if the second one did not open windows, only the first one opened windows, and his house burnt down, and now the second one wants to go ahead and open windows, according to the Shoshanas Yaakov, the first one who has a burnt down house could tell him, could be ma'akev him and say, I'm not letting you do it. And therefore, he says,
You know he's not letting anyone to get.
yeah. And therefore he concludes that Lo Yofe also, the Nesivis, when he wrote later in the Siman and Sifkat Lamed Hey, that if there's a wall with a window and the wall collapses, the Nesivis over there Firzais that the second one could go right away and open windows. L'chatchila. But the Shoshanas Yaakov ultimately doesn't want to fully disagree with the Nesivis, and he says, Tzarechiyun Ladina, but he asks the question. Anyways, the Nesivis, like I told you, Nesivis himself retracted his statement. Why? It's written in the Nesivis. Nesivis over there, and it brings from the Rashba Chelek Aleph Siman Taf Taf Kuf Gimel, that if it falls, the first one could go ahead and rebuild it with his windows. Therefore, we must say that there is some form of zoiche, that the person who has the heir is zoiche in that the person who opens first did acquire something. There was some form of something that he acquired, and not just acquiring the rights of preventing you from having windows. What are the nafkaminas if we say it's midin zoiche, that he has a schia, or that is because he jumped first and did it, and he was kodam beheter? First nafkamina is very simple. If the first one opened up windows, he opened it beheter, then the second one opened up windows. Could the second one say, I want you to block half of your windows? The second one could say, I want to open up windows on my half. I'm opening windows on my half. You open up across the whole front of your house, you ramazik me, I want you to brick half of your windows. So, if it's only because he was samach beheter, he was the first one who did it beheter, then now he does have to brick half of them. Why? Because even with samach beheter, when there's a new hezek which gets created as a result after you did it, you still have to be menei hezek. because you weren't machzik. Your whole right is only mitzad that you took control, that you were the first one who opened it. So therefore, as long as the other one, there's no hezek kriyah, you're good to go. So you can't block him. But once there's a hezek kriyah which gets created as a result of, which will now happen, you have to prevent the hezek kriyah. So half of it you're going to have to break it. And if it's only midin kinyan, What?
The other person being mazikim, when the second person, when he opens up the window, he's being mazikim.
Yeah, but both of them had really rights to Rosh Hashanah first. He could say that both of them had rights to Rosh Hashanah. So if it was not Zoichem and Ahefker, the second one already opened his windows. Now you're able to see. So therefore, he could say Medin Smich. But if it's Medin Kinyan, then no.
Then he opened up the Isser.
Okay, then he opened up the Isser. And if it's Medin Kinyan, then that he was Zoichem in something, then no. And Taka Rabbi Kiva Eger in the Kuntras Milad Zakin says that the Rosh was meduyik when he wrote he's Zocham and Ahefker. He didn't say because he was Soymech Rishon. He says because Zocham and Ahefker. That means he did acquire something over here that he didn't have before. And therefore he says that even if the first one is going to be mazik, mamish giro delay, by looking out the window, he can still continue. But according to, and the way the Nesivis understands the Rashba, according to the Ksaviyad of the Nesivis, which is also printed in the Nesivis, it will still be mutter. He doesn't have to break any of his windows. But according to, if he says Medin Samach Beheter, which is the way Rabbeinu Chanan and Rabbeinu Tam seem to understand it, then it will not work. Another nafkamina that would be is when he's not opening up to Avir Reshus Harabim. He's not opening up a window towards Avir Reshus Harabim. What is he doing? There is two houses, one next to another, attached to each other, or pretty much attached to each other, and each one has their roofs, sloped roofs. And I open up a window from my attic. So now I open up a window from my attic, which is facing the other person's roof. And I want to open up windows along my whole attic for whatever reason. I want to open up windows, either for ventilation, for air, or I want people to be there, or I want to make an office over there, whatever the reason is. So now, according to Rabbeinu Yoina, it's asur anyways, whether the Rosh Hashanah is between, even if Rosh Hashanah is between, Nachas Kam V'Kam, there's no Rosh Hashanah between, for sure it's asur. According to the Rosh and the Rashba, what will be the din? So according to the Rashba clearly writes that it's asur. In Chelik Beis and Shinayin Hey. Why? And what's the logic behind it? Very simple. By Rosh Hashanah, you're zeichem in Ahefker. Over here, there's no Rosh Hashanah, you're not zeichem in anything, and therefore you can only build partially. And therefore, if the other person will come and also want to build, they're going to be mazik each other. Therefore, you can only build in your half. The Rashba is going to hold it like the Rabbeinu Yoina. You can only build half of your attic windows, and so to allow the other person to only build half of his window. Because even if he says Medin Kinyan, it's still going to be asur. If it's Medin Samach Rishayna, it's going to be mutter until proven otherwise, until the other person is going to build. But if it's Medin Kinyan, there's no Kinyan, because no Rosh Hashanah over here. However, the Rivash happens to סימן Chav Beis holds that even over here it does work, and it could be because the Rivash actually takes the more extreme understanding of Samach Rishayna. Samach Rishayna means that you get full rights and you don't have to worry about what's going to happen afterwards. And maybe even according to the Rivash, if it happens afterwards, you might have to actually go and close it. But up until something happens, according to the Rivash, you definitely have a right to open it. Now, I did mention that the Sivas has, some people asked in the Sivas HaMishpat, if you look in Avnei Choshen, he asks a couple questions in the Sivas HaMishpat, but again, if you go according to the second, to the way he explains the Rashba later, these kashas have there's no need. The Ulam HaMishpat, also all in the same blue book, he asks a question on the Sivas, but on a different angle. He says, where do you get this idea that air has no davar she'ein bo mamash and you can't make a kinyan in air? He says in Sif Yud Ches, first of all, there is a concept of zeichem and a hefker later on in this siman. And in siman reish ayin hey, in Choshen Mishpat and Sivav, it's mashma that air gets acquired together with the house. Why? Because it's needed for the house. So the air that comes together with the house, the air around the house, above the house, gets purchased with the house because a house cannot be without the air. And therefore, why does the Nesivis action zich, at least in the first part of the Nesivis, that you cannot make a kinyan in air? And he leaves it as a tzarich on the Nesivis. But again, like I told you, if the Kafan Nesivis himself retracted the statement, and therefore you don't really have to worry about these kashas. Now the Mechaber continues in Sif Tes Vav, whatever the Rosh writes that you're allowed to open across the whole front of the house, or that you're allowed to be moitzi aziz to, when you have two houses next to each other, you could be moitzi aziz. I'm not going to go, I don't have enough time to go into it. Moitzi aziz means that he's putting a window in the ziz, or whatever the definition of it is only in places where meikare, you had no right to be moitzi aziz to Rishus Harabim. That means the minig is not that each person had a right to be moitzi aziz to Rishus Harabim. But in a place where each person has a right to be moitzi aziz from his house to Rishus Harabim, then the air in front of the house is no longer considered hefker. It's considered chaser hashutfim, because each person had a right meikara to do it over there. And therefore, even according to the Rosh, you're not zeiche from the avir of the Rishus Harabim. You're trying to take from chaser hashutfim. And therefore, just like you could take out a ziz, the other person could also take a ziz out afterwards, and the first one cannot block him from doing it. In other words, if the minig in the city is that people are allowed to open in a certain direction to put out zizim or whatever it is, then there's no more concept of schia min ha'hefker. Now, in a chaloin, does a chaloin have the same din also, that if nahagu, then there is no more schia min ha'hefker, and it becomes like chatzar hashutfim? It seems like there's no nafkamin according to the Smeh in Sifkat al-Amidalid, and therefore the Smeh concludes over there that in all these topics you should be making a pshara. This Smeh was questioned by a bunch of mefarshim that say that the Smeh doesn't make any sense. Taz himself disagreed with the Smeh, and the Smeh understands that by a chaloin, even if nohagu, you still can't say that it's like chatzar hashutfim. But if you look in the Bedek HaBayis, in the beginning of the Siman, Bedek HaBayis in the Beis Yosef, it seems that even the chaloin in the side of Rishus Harabim, you could still go based on the minig, and if the minig is such, then the Rosh would be moide that it's not going to that you cannot open up windows across the whole thing, because it is considered like chatzar hashutfim. Now, just to point out that the Ulam HaMishpat, being that we discussed in the past din of the Machusa, etc., the same Ulam HaMishpat which I mentioned to you before on Seif Yud Daled is machriya that even in a place where Medina de Malchusa, you are allowed to open windows without any worry for Hezekah. And he says, being that in Eretz Yisrael it would not apply, even if Din de Machos would be that way. Because in Eretz Yisrael you have to go pi Dinei HaTorah. He says, being that it's neged Din HaTorah, so Din de Machusa ein mehani, doesn't help you. That goes into the discussion, which is beyond the scope of this year. If Din de Machusa, where does Din de Machusa apply? There's three understandings of what Din de Machusa is. And the Machlekes Rishonim, if Din de Machusa could apply in Eretz Yisrael or not. But according to the way the Ulam HaMishpat says that in these dinim of Hezekah, being that in something which is against Din HaTorah in Eretz Yisrael, you cannot use Din de Machusa to establish a right to violate a Din Torah, a Din Midaraisa in Eretz Yisrael. As opposed to in other countries where Din de Machusa, they accepted. The minig was to accept the rules of the government. So therefore, you are allowed to accept it. But in Eretz Yisrael, you don't have a right to accept Din Malchusa. That's the understanding of the Ulama Mishpat, and like I said, the Rishonim which follow that opinion, that in Eretz Yisrael, it might be begeder of an Isser to go according to Din Malchusa. So they're going to ask me, what's the nafkamina b'chalal? What relevance is there today? Let's say in Chutz La'aretz, when you have these things, or an example of something which is opening a window which I could see to you, and you still don't have windows opening towards me. So now, let's say I have a house, and next to me is another house, and between the houses there's an alleyway. But it's not chatzar hashutfim, it doesn't belong to anybody, it doesn't belong to me and you, it's not a shared driveway. And I want to put security cameras over there. I'm not putting anything, I want to put security cameras over there. So now, if it's so close that if you would have windows in your wall, I would be able to see right into your house. But now, there's no windows there. You didn't open up windows to your house. So, could I go and put security cameras along the whole length in such a way that I'll be able to see my house and your house when you open up windows or not? And I'll be able to see what's going on or not. Or not. Or I could only do it on my side in a way that I'm not looking at your side. And that you should not look into the other person's potential future windows. That will be a shayla according to the Rosh, or according to according to Rabbi Yin, according to the Rosh, and like Rabbi Yin, which is also. Now, obviously, if there are already windows, you can't go and put up security cameras which look into the other person's windows. You don't have to mention it. Even though one of the reasons of Hezekriya that we mentioned is Medina Ein Hara. And we can say, if Ein Hara helps when there's a camera. Ein Hara is if I'm looking at your mistakel sada chavere when the stalks are growing. If I put a camera on your stalks, it's not Ein Hara. Ein Hara is only with me, with my neshama doing damage to you. But if over here a camera is not Ein Hara. But still, this concept of Hezekriya, because we mentioned one of the other issues of Hezekriya is a person does not want somebody else to know what he's doing in his own property. So if I have a camera which is facing into somebody else's house, the concept of Hezekriya is still there, because I could see what I'm doing it. And obviously, I don't have to tell you that you're not allowed to install cameras in somebody else's house without his permission, or record somebody without his permission. And for this thing, it means that he doesn't know you're recording. Not when you're talking to each other, it's a different topic, and not enough to talk about it. But let's say stick a recorder into somebody else's office, and you want to just keep track of what the other person is doing. It's according to that the way the Alter Rebbe explains it, which is based on the Rishonim and the Achreinim, and it's also that the person does not want somebody else to know what is going on in his house. So that's not relevant to this discussion. We don't even have to mention it. The only point is that I wanted to mention is recording. If you have that if I put a camera which is facing a certain area, which down the line the other person could open up windows over there, is planning on opening up windows over there, then according to Rabbi Yin, it would be also, I would not be able to put or when the person opens up a windows, I'm going to have to redirect my camera. That would be the discussion. The only way that gets out of it is that there is a concept of din malchusa and minhag ha'ir, that in places like New York, there's security cameras everywhere. And everybody knows that there's security cameras, and it's for the purpose of safety. So therefore, even if I open up a security camera, as long as I'm not directing it directly to look at your window, l'cha'ira mitzad din malchusa should not be considered asur.